It started with a phone call dripping in suspicion. A quiet suburban neighborhood, manicured lawns and white picket fences, where belonging was dictated not by kindness, but by skin color. The HOA claimed they had a suspicious stranger on their block. They dialed the police without hesitation, their eyes fixed on one woman unpacking groceries at her own home. Sirens screamed closer, neighbors peeked through blinds, and whispers turned to judgment. But none of them knew. The suspicious stranger was not only a resident. She was the county sheriff. Her name was Sheriff Danielle Harris, a decorated law enforcement officer who had spent 2 decades serving her county with honor. She had walked through crime scenes no one else dared to enter, brought justice to countless families, and mentored young officers who looked up to her as a symbol of strength. But when she bought a modest home in a quiet suburban development, she believed she was finally stepping into peace, a place where her badge could rest on the nightstand and where she could simply be a neighbor. The neighborhood looked picture perfect. From the outside, rows of trimmed hedges, American flags swaying in the breeze, and an HOA board that proudly declared they kept standards high. Yet beneath the manicured surface, unwritten rules whispered loudly. Danielle knew what it felt like to be watched when she drove through the gates. She noticed the tight smiles, the quick glances, the questions that felt less like conversation and more like interrogation. Still, she stayed quiet, telling herself time would soften the edges. But that illusion shattered the afternoon she carried grocery bags from her car. A simple act, ordinary and unremarkable, until a neighbor decided her very presence looked out of place. A phone call was made. A report was filed. And suddenly Danielle was no longer just a woman unpacking food for her dinner. In the eyes of her own community, she became a suspect. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio, reporting a suspicious individual loitering in a residential area. To the officers racing down the street, it sounded routine, a call they'd answered dozens of times before. But this time, the suspect was Sheriff Danielle Harris, unloading groceries in broad daylight at her own driveway. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their phones already recording. They whispered and speculated, feeding the narrative that Danielle didn't belong. Some swore they had never seen her before, even though she had lived there for months. Others claimed she seemed to be casing the house. Each word sharpened the invisible blade of suspicion, cutting deeper with every second. Danielle noticed the stares, the sudden hush of conversations. Then she heard the sirens, loud, piercing, and unnecessary. She froze, heart pounding not out of guilt, but out of dread. She had spent years training officers to de-escalate situations just like this. But now she was on the other side of the badge. 2 squad cars screeched to a halt. Doors slammed. Officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. Commands barked into the air, sharp and demeaning. To the outside world, it was an image burned into America's conscience, a black woman framed as a threat, stripped of her humanity before she could utter a word. Danielle's mind raced. She could have flashed her badge immediately, revealed her identity, and ended the charade. But she hesitated, not because she doubted her authority, but because she wanted to see just how deep the prejudice ran. Would they see her as a neighbor, a homeowner, a woman deserving dignity? Or would her skin color blind them to everything else? As the officers advanced, she felt the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. Memories of past cases, names of victims she'd sworn to protect, faces of families who had begged for justice, they all blurred together. For the first time in a long time, she felt the cold edge of fear. Not for herself, but for what this moment revealed, that no amount of rank, achievement, or service could shield her from the prejudice that had been waiting silently behind white fences. The HOA members watched from their porches, some smug, others nervous. The board president even stepped forward, arms crossed, convinced they had done the right thing by calling the police. To them, this was enforcement of neighborhood standards. To Danielle, it was a betrayal of the very values she had risked her life to uphold. And as the officers approached closer, demanding identification, The line between injustice and humiliation grew razor thin. Danielle knew the moment of truth was seconds away. One decision, one revelation, could either shatter stereotypes or confirm them in the cruelest way possible. The flashing lights painted Danielle's driveway in red and blue. Commands grew louder, more aggressive. An officer's hand rested firmly on his holster, as if danger was inevitable. Every second stretched painfully long, the air thick with accusation. Danielle slowly raised her hands, her grocery bag spilling onto the pavement. Oranges rolled across the driveway, an image both ordinary and tragic. Food scattered like evidence at a crime scene. She could feel her neighbors' eyes. On her, some recording gleefully, others whispering about what she must have done. Identification, one officer demanded, his voice clipped and sharp. Danielle's pulse raced. She reached into her pocket with deliberate slowness, aware that any sudden movement could be misread. She pulled out her wallet, flipping it open, to reveal not just a driver's license but her sheriff's badge. The reaction was instantaneous. Silence swallowed the street. The officers' postures stiffened, their eyes darting between the badge and her face. Confusion, disbelief, and shame collided in their expressions. Danielle stepped forward, her voice calm but edged with steel. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The authority in her presence was undeniable. "I live here," her badge silently declared. "I protect this county. I protect you." The HOA president's smirk faltered. Neighbors who had once craned their necks now shrank back, into the shadows. The same people who labeled her a stranger were suddenly confronted with a truth they couldn't ignore. The woman they had reduced to a stereotype was the very person sworn to uphold their safety. The officers muttered apologies, stumbling over, their words trying to mask their embarrassment. But the damage was done. Danielle had been profiled, humiliated, and stripped of dignity in her own neighborhood, until her badge reminded them she was someone. For a moment, her eyes swept over the crowd. She wondered how different this night might have ended had she not been wearing that badge. And that thought burned deeper than any accusation, leaving her with a chilling realization. Her safety had been restored not by her humanity, but by her authority. When the patrol cars finally pulled away, the flashing lights fading into this night, Danielle stood alone in her driveway, her groceries still scattered across the pavement. What should have been a quiet evening at home had become a public trial, one where the jury was her neighbors, the prosecutor was prejudice, and the verdict was humiliation. She picked up the oranges one by one, each piece of fruit a reminder of how fragile dignity could be. Her badge might have silenced the officers, but it couldn't erase the stares that lingered. It couldn't undo the whispers that had started the moment she arrived. And it certainly couldn't heal the ache of knowing that without her title, she might not have been standing there at all. The neighborhood returned to its staged calm, but something permanent had cracked beneath the surface. Danielle knew this wasn't just about her. It was about every black homeowner who had been questioned for existing in spaces they had every right to call home. It was about the unseen walls built higher than fences, walls of suspicion, exclusion, and quiet hostility. She thought of the young people she mentored, many of them black, many of them dreaming of careers in law enforcement. What lesson would they take from this? That respect had to be earned twice over? That authority mattered only when paired with a badge? That humanity alone wasn't enough to protect them? Danielle refused to let the night end there. The next morning, she attended the HOA meeting, calm, composed, and still wearing her badge, not for intimidation, but as a symbol of accountability. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She asked a question that cut sharper than anger. "Would you have treated me the same if I weren't your sheriff?" Silence followed. The board shuffled in their seats. Neighbors avoided her gaze, but the question lingered, echoing louder than any siren. This was bigger than Danielle. It was about confronting a truth many wanted to ignore, that racism wasn't just in headlines or history books. It lived in neighborhoods, in whispered calls to the police, in assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. By the time Danielle left the meeting, She knew some hearts wouldn't change. But others would never look at their sheriff the same way again. And maybe, just maybe, a seed of reflection had been planted. Because the real story wasn't about a sheriff proving her authority. It was about a community forced to confront its prejudice. It was about asking the uncomfortable, necessary question. If a badge is the only thing protecting dignity, what does that say about us as a society? And for anyone watching, the question remained, what kind of neighbor would you be if the call was yours to make?